Maggie Thornfield never imagined she'd be homeless at 42. Just 3 years ago, she had a marketing executive position, a Tudor-style home in the suburbs, and what she thought was a stable marriage. Now she stood on courthouse steps, rain soaking through her last good blazer, holding her daughter's hand and a manila envelope containing her shattered future. Behind them, the Ashworth family, her former in-laws, climbed into their Mercedes, their laughter carrying across the parking lot. Victoria Ashworth, her ex-mother-in-law, rolled down the window. "Some people just aren't cut out for the real world, Maggie. Maybe this will teach you some humility." The car pulled away, splashing dirty water over Maggie's shoes. Maggie guided Iris into the courthouse bathroom, setting her purse on the counter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Mascara tracked down her cheeks like black rivers of defeat. She caught her reflection, hollow-eyed, pale, a woman she barely recognized. "Let me help, Mommy," Iris said. She dampened a towel under the faucet and gently dabbed at her mother's cheeks. At 11, Iris already showed a caretaker's instinct. Her small face serious. Maggie's phone buzzed again. 17 missed calls from the bank, 3 from her landlord, all delivering the same message. Everything was gone. Their apartment lease had been in her ex-husband's name. The joint accounts had been emptied weeks ago. Even her office had been cleared out while she sat in mediation. Her position eliminated at her father-in-law's company, where she'd worked for 9 years. "You're pretty even when you cry," Iris said. Maggie pulled her daughter close, inhaling the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood. "You're the only thing that matters now," she whispered. "We're going to figure this out." But how? The settlement left her with $847 in checking, not enough for first and last month's rent anywhere, not enough for a hotel beyond a few nights. Their possessions were locked in a house she no longer owned, and the key had already been changed. She discovered that yesterday when she'd tried to retrieve Iris's school clothes. Outside, the rain intensified. Maggie checked her watch. 4 p.m. Banking hours were nearly over. They needed to move quickly. "Where are we going?" Iris asked as they hurried to the parking garage. "To the bank, sweetie. We need to get our money." The bank teller's sympathetic expression told Maggie she wasn't the first woman to stand at that counter with red-rimmed eyes and divorce papers. "I'm afraid there's a lien against your accounts, Mrs. Thornfield. We can only release the amount specified in the court order." "But that's all I have left," Maggie said. "Everything else is gone." The teller counted out 847 in 20s and 1s. Maggie slipped the money into an inner pocket of her purse, paranoia suddenly making her feel like everyone was watching. Night fell early, hastened by storm clouds. Maggie drove aimlessly, the Honda Civic's windshield wipers beating a metronomic rhythm that matched her racing thoughts. Iris had fallen asleep in the back seat, her backpack serving as a makeshift pillow. They ended up in a Walmart parking lot, one of the few places Maggie knew wouldn't hassle them for staying overnight. She reclined her seat slightly, staring at the neon store sign through the curtain of rain on the windshield. "We just need a plan," she whispered to herself. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by security patrols and the fear that someone might recognize them. The marketing executive and her daughter, now car dwellers. Morning arrived with stiff necks and rumbling stomachs. "Breakfast?" Maggie asked, bright. They used the Walmart bathroom to freshen up, brushing teeth and changing clothes from the single overnight bag Maggie had managed to pack before being locked out. In the cafe of a nearby bookstore, they shared a muffin and hot chocolate, making it last as long as possible. "Can we go home today?" Iris asked. "Not to our old home, sweetie. We're going to find a new one. An adventure, just for us. Will Dad be there?" "No, honey. Remember we talked about this? It's going to be just us for a while." The next 2 days followed the same pattern. Sleeping in the car, washing up in public restrooms, eating cheap meals and spending hours in libraries and cafes to stay out of the rain. Maggie's search for affordable housing grew increasingly desperate. Every listing required first and last month's rent plus security deposit. On the third night, parked behind a 24-hour diner where the night manager had kindly allowed them to stay, Maggie scrolled through Craigslist on her phone while Iris slept. Most listings were far beyond her means. But then, near midnight, a new post appeared. 1,987 school bus, $3,200 OBO, runs. Needs work. Perfect for a conversion project. Maggie stared at the listing. A bus? People actually lived in converted buses. She'd seen a documentary about it once. The price was nearly everything they had, but it would be a roof over their heads. She clicked on the photos. The bus was in rough shape, yellow paint faded to a sickly custard, some windows cracked, interior seats torn, but it had potential. It had wheels. It could move if they needed to escape. Before she could talk herself out of it, Maggie sent a message to the seller. Available to see tomorrow morning? Dawn painted the sky a watercolor pink as they drove to the outskirts of town. The junkyard's entrance was marked by a hand-painted sign, Frank's Auto Salvage, Sales. Rusted cars and machinery parts created a metal maze around them. Frank himself emerged from a corrugated metal office, a barrel-chested man with oil-stained coveralls and hands that looked like they'd never been fully clean. "You the bus lady?" he called out. Maggie nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Yes, I called about the school bus." Frank led them through the yard, past automotive skeletons and stacks of tires, to where the bus sat like a beached yellow whale. Up close, it was even worse than the photos. Rust eating through the metal in places, graffiti scratched into the windows, the smell of mildew and old diesel fuel emanating from inside. "Bought it at auction when the school district upgraded," Frank explained. "The engine's solid. Transmission's got maybe another 50, 0 miles. The interior needs work, but the bones are good." Maggie climbed the steps, Iris right behind her. The inside was a time capsule of public education. Green vinyl seats torn and split, floor littered with decades of pencil stubs and paper scraps. At the very back was a tiny bathroom cubicle, barely big enough to turn around in. "It's like a giant crayon," Iris whispered. "Look at all the light that comes in, Mom." Indeed, despite the grime, the bus was flooded with morning sunlight streaming through the long rows of windows on both sides. "Does everything work?" Maggie asked. Frank shrugged. "Mechanically, yeah. Starts right up. Heat works. No AC, though. The previous owner started to convert it. Put in that bathroom and some basic electrical, but never finished. You'd need to do the rest. Can I see it run?" Frank climbed into the driver's seat, inserting an oversized key. The engine turned over after 2 attempts, rumbling to life with a cloud of black smoke that quickly cleared. The vibration hummed through the metal floor. Iris looked up at her mother. "We could paint it pretty colors. Make it like a house on wheels." Maggie did some quick mental calculations. The bus would cost nearly everything they had. They'd need to keep enough for food and basic supplies until she could find work. They'd have nowhere to park it legally long-term. "And yet, what are you planning to do with it?" Frank asked. "Live in it," Maggie answered honestly. Something in Frank's expression softened. He turned the engine off and reached into his pocket, pulling out registration papers. "Tell you what, I'll take 3 even, and I'll throw in a full tank of diesel. That should get you started." Outside, Maggie counted out the cash, $150 $20 bills. Her hands trembled as she passed them over, watching their safety net dwindle to just $647. "You know how to drive this thing?" Frank asked. "I drove a delivery van in college," Maggie said. "I can handle it." Frank spent 20 minutes showing her the basics: how to adjust the oversized mirrors, the proper braking distance, how to navigate the longer wheelbase. By noon, Maggie was cautiously pulling the enormous vehicle onto the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Where are we going?" Iris asked. "Somewhere we can park overnight," Maggie replied, eyes fixed on the road. They ended up behind an abandoned strip mall on the edge of town, hidden from the main road by overgrown bushes. As night fell, they spread the blankets from their emergency car kit across one of the less damaged bench seats. "It's like camping," Iris said. "Exactly. Indoor camping." After Iris finally drifted off to sleep, Maggie sat in the driver's seat, staring out at the darkness. The enormity of what she'd done hit her in waves. She'd spent nearly everything they had on a dilapidated school bus. They had no permanent place to park it, no real plan for converting it, and no steady income. Rain began to patter against the metal roof. A leak somewhere near the back created a steady drip, drip, drip onto the floor. Maggie pulled her knees to her chest and allowed herself 5 minutes of silent tears. When those 5 minutes were up, she wiped her face and reached into her overnight bag. From its bottom, she pulled out a worn, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age and use. She opened it carefully, inhaling the scent of vanilla and cinnamon that seemed permanently infused in its pages. Her grandmother's handwriting flowed across the paper in elegant script from another era. The first page bore an inscription. "To my Maggie, the secret ingredient is starting over. With love, Grandma Rosali." Maggie traced the words with her fingertip. Her grandmother had survived the Depression, widowhood at 32, and raising 3 children alone while running a boarding house. If Rosali could rebuild from nothing, so could she. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, glancing back at Iris's sleeping form. The first week on the bus was a harsh education in survival. Every morning, Maggie woke to condensation dripping from the windows onto her face. The metal walls, without insulation, turned the vehicle into an icebox at night and an oven by midday. The tiny bathroom was functional but primitive, a camping toilet that needed regular emptying at gas station dumping stations, a situation so humiliating that Maggie chose to use public restrooms whenever possible. They parked in different locations each night, behind strip malls, in vacant lots, occasionally in Walmart parking lots, until security would inevitably ask them to move along. On the 4th night, Iris developed a cough, the dampness and cold taking their toll on her young body. Maggie spent their last 47 on children's cold medicine, cough drops, and soup from a nearby convenience store. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered. "I'll make this better soon." But how? With no money left and no job prospects that would pay enough for housing, they were trapped. The following morning, Maggie made a decision. If they were going to live in this bus, they needed to make it livable. Using the free Wi-Fi at the public library, she researched bus conversions while Iris did her homework at a nearby table. What Maggie discovered gave her hope. People all over the country were turning vehicles into tiny homes, often with minimal budgets. "We need insulation first," she murmured, "then proper bedding, some kind of kitchen setup." That afternoon, they visited a home improvement store. Maggie couldn't afford much, but she purchased a few essential items: a roll of reflective insulation, basic tools, battery-powered LED lights, and adhesive hooks. The elderly cashier raised an eyebrow at her selections. "School project?" he asked, nodding toward Iris. "Home improvement," Maggie replied. Back at the bus, they began work. Maggie measured and cut the reflective insulation, showing Iris how to help press it into place against the metal walls. They covered the windows with removable insulation panels at night, but kept them open during the day for light and air. "It's already warmer," Iris observed. Slowly, the interior began to transform. Maggie repurposed the bench seats, removing some to create floor space and arranging others into a seating area. She found discarded furniture behind an apartment complex, a small table that fit perfectly in one corner, cushions that could be cleaned and used for bedding. Iris took charge of decorating, using her colored pencils to create artwork they taped to the walls. She named their new home the Sunflower, because, as she explained, sunflowers always turn to face the light, no matter where they're planted. By the end of the second week, they had created a crude kitchen area using a camping stove Maggie purchased at a pawn shop. Their first home-cooked meal was simple: beans and rice with a side of canned vegetables, but it tasted like victory. "This is actually pretty good," Iris said. Maggie smiled, watching her daughter eat with appetite for the first time in days. "Tomorrow I'm going to try baking something. Grandma Rosali's recipe book has some simple breads we can make in a Dutch oven." That night, after Iris fell asleep, Maggie paged through the recipe book again. She'd never been much of a baker, always too busy with work, too reliant on takeout and prepared foods. But now, with limited resources and time in abundance, Rosali's recipes offered not just sustenance but comfort. She paused at a page titled "Depression Bread, No Eggs Needed." Below the ingredients list was a note in her grandmother's handwriting: "Made this weekly during the hardest times." The kneading heals your hands and heart. The next morning, Maggie mixed flour, water, salt, and a precious packet of yeast. As she worked the dough with her hands, she felt a curious calm spreading through her body. The repetitive motion of kneading became almost meditative. Push, fold, turn, repeat. By the time she shaped the dough into a small loaf and placed it in their makeshift oven, her shoulders had relaxed for the first time in weeks. The smell that filled the bus an hour later was transformative, yeasty, warm, like home. Iris woke from a nap, her nose twitching. "What's that amazing smell?" she asked. Maggie carefully lifted the lid of the Dutch oven. "Bread, just like Grandma Rosali used to make." They ate it still warm, spread with a thin layer of peanut butter. The simple pleasure of homemade bread lifted their spirits more than Maggie could have anticipated. As their third week in the bus began, they settled into a routine. Mornings were for cleaning and maintenance. Afternoons, Iris attended school. Maggie had managed to keep her enrolled by using a friend's address, while Maggie searched for work and baked. Evenings were for shared meals and stories. They had found a semi-permanent parking spot behind a row of storage units whose owner took pity on them and allowed them to stay for $50 a week, money Maggie earned by cleaning the office and maintaining the grounds. Their bus home was still far from ideal. Rain found new leaks to exploit. The bathroom situation remained challenging. Laundry had to be done in sinks or at laundromats when they could afford it. One evening, as Maggie was baking a batch of simple cinnamon rolls using one of Rosalie's recipes, a tap on the bus door startled them. An elderly man stood outside, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing a cardigan despite the warm evening. "Pardon the intrusion," he said. "I live in the apartment complex across the way." He gestured toward a brick building, visible through the trees. "I couldn't help noticing you've been parked here for a while. But more importantly, I couldn't help smelling what you're baking." Maggie tensed, prepared for complaints or threats to report them. "That smell, is that genuine sourdough?" Surprised, Maggie shook her head. "Cinnamon rolls, actually. Simple ones." The man leaned slightly. "Whatever it is, it smells like proper baking. I'm Harold Whitmore. I was a pastry chef for 40 years before retiring." "Maggie Thornfield," she replied. "And this is my daughter, Iris. You're living in this bus, aren't you? Temporarily." "We're in transition," Harold nodded. "Well, Miss Thornfield, I have a proposition. I have a full kitchen that goes largely unused these days. My hands aren't what they used to be, arthritis, you know, but I miss the smell of baking. Would you consider using my kitchen once a week? In exchange for, say, some of whatever you make?" Maggie blinked in surprise. "You'd let strangers use your kitchen?" "I'm a good judge of character," Harold replied. That Friday, Maggie and Iris climbed the stairs to Harold's second-floor apartment. The space was modest but immaculate, clearly the home of someone who valued order and precision. The kitchen, however, was anything but modest. Professional-grade appliances gleamed beneath custom lighting, and an island workspace dominated the center of the room. "You said you were a pastry chef," Maggie said. "Where did you work?" "Oh, here and there," Harold replied vaguely. "Spent my last 20 years at the Ritz-Carlton before retiring. Now, what were you planning to make today?" Maggie hesitantly pulled out Rosalie's recipe book. "I thought I'd try my grandmother's sourdough bread." Harold's eyes lit up at the sight of the worn book. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hands. He turned the pages with the reverence of someone handling a sacred text, nodding occasionally at particular recipes. "Your grandmother knew what she was doing. These are solid recipes, fundamentals with personal touches." He looked up at Maggie. "You have baking in your blood, then." "I wouldn't say that," Maggie laughed. "Until a few weeks ago, I barely cooked at all. But you feel it now, don't you? The pull of it, the way the dough speaks to your hands." "Yes, actually, it's calming. Baking is meditation with a practical outcome. Now, let's see about this sourdough." What followed was an education. Harold didn't just let them use his kitchen, he taught. He showed Maggie how to test flour for protein content by how it felt between her fingers, demonstrated the perfect kneading technique that used the weight of her body instead of just her arms, and explained the chemistry behind the rise. "Bread is alive," he told Iris. You're creating a little ecosystem, and your job is to keep it happy." When the first loaf emerged from Harold's oven, even he looked impressed. "Your grandmother's recipe is excellent. The crust has just the right resistance. And listen," he tapped the bottom of the loaf, producing a hollow sound. "Perfect." They shared the bread with butter and honey, the three of them sitting at Harold's small dining table as evening light slanted through the windows. "May I ask," Harold said carefully, "how you came to be living in a bus?" Maggie hesitated, then gave him the abbreviated version: the divorce, the unjust settlement, the desperation that led to their current situation. Harold listened without interruption, his expression darkening at certain details. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Life has dealt you a difficult hand," he finally said, "but you're playing it with grace." He looked at Iris, who was drawing patterns in the honey on her plate. "And you, young lady, are braver than most adults I know. Mom says we're just camping until our real adventure starts." A positive outlook, Harold nodded, essential for survival. He turned back to Maggie. "I'd like to make our arrangement more regular, twice a week, perhaps. I have much to teach, if you're willing to learn." Thus began Maggie's real education in baking. Tuesdays and Fridays became sacred, days when the bus was simply transportation to Harold's apartment, where flour dusted countertops and the air smelled of yeast and sugar. Harold proved to be a demanding but patient teacher, correcting Maggie's technique with gentle persistence and praising her instincts when she got something right. "You have good hands," he told her after she mastered a particularly delicate pastry dough, sensitive to temperature and texture, that can't be taught. Iris, too, found a role, measuring ingredients with careful precision and developing an eye for when things were just right. She named their creations sunshine rolls for the cinnamon buns with orange zest, cloud bread for the lightest, whitest loaves. One Tuesday, as Maggie was packing up their baked goods to take back to the bus, Harold disappeared into a back room. He returned carrying a glass jar containing what looked like a pale, bubbling batter. "This," he said, "is victory." "Victory," Maggie repeated. "My sourdough starter, named by my father when he created it in 1943 after receiving news that my uncle had survived the Battle of Sicily. It's been alive ever since, nearly 80 years of continuous feeding and care." Maggie stared at the jar with new appreciation. "It's older than you are." "Indeed," Harold chuckled, "and still going strong, unlike my knees." He held out the jar. "I'd like you to take some, a small portion, to start your own legacy." "Harold, I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "Victory deserves to work with hands that appreciate it. Your bread is too good for that camping stove setup. Take it, feed it weekly, and bring me a loaf made from it next time." That night, back in the bus, Maggie placed the small jar of starter in their makeshift refrigerator with the care one might give a rare orchid. Something about possessing a living culture that had existed since World War II made her feel connected to a tradition larger than herself. As the weeks passed, Harold's lessons extended beyond technique. He taught Maggie about timing, economy of movement, and how to adapt recipes to available ingredients. But most importantly, he helped her understand that baking was more than just following instructions. It was an art form, a way of nurturing others, a small but significant way to create beauty in the world. "People will forget what you say," he told her, "but they never forget how your food makes them feel." The turning point came unexpectedly one morning in their 6th week of bus living. Maggie had parked overnight in a quiet corner of a strip mall parking lot. She was outside, using a hose connection to fill their water containers, when a police cruiser pulled up alongside the bus. Her heart sank. They'd been asked to move along before, but something about the officer's deliberate approach suggested this might be more serious. "Morning, ma'am," the officer said, removing his sunglasses. His nameplate read, "Sullivan. Is this your vehicle?" "Yes, officer," Maggie replied. "We're just filling water. We'll be moving along shortly." Detective Ray Sullivan studied the bus, taking in the curtained windows and the small potted plant visible through the open door. "Are you living there?" Maggie hesitated, then nodded. Lying would only make things worse. That's against city ordinances, I'm afraid. Can't have people camping in commercial areas. I understand, Maggie said quickly. We'll leave right away. The officer glanced toward the bus again, where Iris had appeared in the doorway, her expression fearful. That your daughter? Yes, Iris. Iris clutched the door frame, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Look, I'm not here to make trouble for you, but I've had complaints from business owners. I can't just ignore it. Of course, Maggie said. Another move, another day of uncertainty. We'll pack up immediately. Before the officer could respond, a heavenly smell wafted from the bus, fresh cinnamon rolls cooling on the tiny counter by the window. It was a batch Maggie had baked at Harold's the previous evening, using Rosalie's recipe enhanced with Harold's techniques. What is that smell? Cinnamon rolls, Iris volunteered. Mom made them. They're still warm. She paused, then added, You look hungry, officer. Would you like one? Maggie shot her daughter a warning look, but Iris had already disappeared inside, returning with a roll carefully placed on one of their few plates. Thank you, miss. He took a bite, and his eyes widened. For a moment, he said nothing, just chewed slowly with an expression of growing wonder. Ma'am, he finally said, this is extraordinary. Family recipe, Maggie explained. My grandmother's. My wife used to bake, he said quietly, before she passed away last year. I haven't tasted anything like this since. He trailed off, then seemed to collect himself. What do you charge for these? Charge? Maggie blinked. Oh, we don't sell them. They're just for us. The officer finished the roll, brushing crumbs from his uniform. You should. Seriously. He glanced at his watch, then back at the bus. Tell you what, there's an empty lot behind the fire station on Maple Street. City-owned, not commercial property. You could park there for a while without violating ordinances. And I'd pay $20 for a dozen of these every Friday if you can make them regularly. Maggie stared at him. You want to buy my cinnamon rolls? Ma'am, I'd buy anything that tastes like this. And I know about a dozen firefighters and fellow officers who would too. After Sullivan left with directions to find them at their new parking spot, following Friday, Maggie sat in the driver's seat, stunned. Did we just get our first customer? Iris asked. I think we did, Maggie replied slowly. That Friday, Maggie baked 4 dozen cinnamon rolls in Harold's kitchen. He watched with amusement as she carefully packed them into boxes salvaged from a bakery dumpster. So, a police officer tasted your rolls and now you're in business, he summarized. That's how it starts. One person tastes something extraordinary and tells another. Before you know it, you have a reputation. It's just a few rolls, Maggie said. Hardly a business. Every empire begins with a single brick, my dear. Detective Sullivan arrived at the appointed time, and his face lit up at the sight of the boxes. These smell even better than I remember. He handed Maggie $20. The following week, Sullivan returned, this time with orders from 3 other officers and 2 firefighters. The week after that, the number doubled. Word spread through the police station and fire department about the bus lady's incredible pastries. Soon, Maggie was baking 3 days a week in Harold's kitchen, producing not just cinnamon rolls but sourdough bread, muffins, and simple cookies from Rosalie's recipe book. Iris, watching their little operation grow, had an idea. Using art supplies from the dollar store, she designed their first sign, Rosalie's Rolling Bakery with a painted sunflower. They taped it to the bus window, and suddenly they weren't just living in a bus. They were operating from a mobile bakery. We need a system, Harold declared one day. Production schedule, inventory management, pricing strategy. I'm happy to help with that. With Harold's guidance, they developed a routine. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who owned a small commissary kitchen, agreed to rent them space during off hours for a percentage of sales. Harold mentored the baking, Mrs. Chen provided legitimate kitchen space, Maggie handled production, and Iris managed what she called the customer experience with her natural charm and artistic touches. By the end of their second month of bus living, the bakery was bringing in $247 weekly, more money than they'd had since the divorce. It wasn't enough to rent an apartment, but it covered their basic needs and allowed them to improve the bus with better insulation, a more efficient cooking setup, and proper bedding. More importantly, it gave them purpose. The transformation was visible in both of them. Maggie stood straighter, smiled more easily, while Iris blossomed with the responsibility of being her mother's business partner rather than just a dependent. One evening, as they counted the day's earnings at their little table, Iris looked up at her mother with serious eyes. "Mom, are we still in transition?" Maggie considered the question. "What do you mean, sweetie? You told that man we were in transition, like this was temporary, but I kind of like our bus now, and I really like our bakery." Maggie reached across the table. "The bus was supposed to be temporary, but maybe the bakery is our transition to something better, something we're building together." Iris nodded. "I think Great-Grandma Rosali would be proud of us." "I know she would," Maggie agreed. By their third month of operation, Rosalie's rolling bakery had developed a modest but devoted following. What began with Detective Sullivan's sweet tooth had expanded to include factory workers who discovered them during shift changes, office employees who drove over during lunch breaks, and families who placed weekend orders for special occasions. Maggie established a routine, arriving at Mrs. Chen's commissary kitchen at 4 a.m., baking until mid-morning, then using the bus as a mobile sales point at various locations throughout the day. They developed a schedule: Mondays near the police station, Tuesdays by the community college, Wednesdays at the farmer's market, and so on. "You're developing quite the enterprise," Harold observed. "Have you considered how you'll manage growth?" Maggie laughed. "Harold, we're selling baked goods from a converted school bus. I'm hardly running a corporation. Every successful business faces the same question eventually: how to meet increased demand without sacrificing quality. You're approaching that point faster than you realize." He was right. The physical toll was becoming evident. Working 16-hour days, Maggie baked through the night while Iris slept, then handled sales during the day while Iris was at school. She'd lost weight, developed a persistent cough from flour dust, and sometimes caught herself dozing while standing up. The morning Maggie found herself nodding off at the commissary kitchen mixer, she knew something had to change. Mrs. Chen found her slumped against the counter, the machine still running. "You work too hard," the older woman scolded, helping Maggie to a chair. "I don't have a choice," Maggie replied. Mrs. Chen pursed her lips. "In my country, family business means family helps. Your daughter is old enough to learn more than just selling." The suggestion gave Maggie pause. Iris was only 11, but she was mature for her age, responsible, and eager to be involved. That weekend, Maggie began teaching Iris simple baking tasks: measuring ingredients, mixing dry components, packaging finished products. To her surprise, Iris took to it naturally, displaying an intuitive understanding of the process that reminded Maggie of Harold's comments about having baking in your blood. "The dough feels different today," Iris noted. "More alive." "Good observation. It's warmer in the kitchen today, so the yeast is more active. That means we need to watch the rise time carefully." These moments of teaching brought unexpected joy. For the first time, Maggie felt she was passing on something valuable to her daughter. Not just recipes or techniques, but a way of understanding the world through creating something meaningful with her hands. Their relationship deepened through this shared work. They developed a language of nods and gestures in the kitchen, anticipating each other's needs without words. Their tiny bus home, once a symbol of their fall from stability, had become the headquarters of a genuine partnership. One Tuesday evening, after a particularly successful day at the community college where they'd sold out by noon, Harold invited them to dinner at his apartment. It wasn't unusual for him to cook for them, but something about his formal invitation suggested a special occasion. When they arrived, they found his dining table set with proper linens and his best dishes. He'd prepared a simple but elegant meal: roast chicken, vegetables from his small balcony garden, and a bottle of sparkling cider for toasting. "What are we celebrating?" Maggie asked. 3 months, Harold replied, raising his glass. 3 months since you first used my kitchen. 3 months of watching you transform from a woman in crisis to a budding entrepreneur. I think that deserves recognition. They clinked glasses, Iris beaming at being included in the grown-up ritual. After dinner, Harold disappeared into his bedroom, returning with a worn leather case. He placed it reverently on the table before Maggie. "I want you to have these," he said, unzipping the case to reveal a set of professional pastry tools, gleaming metal implements with wooden handles worn smooth from years of use. Maggie gasped. Inside were specialty spatulas, precision knives, pastry cutters, decorating tools, a complete collection that would cost hundreds of dollars. "Harold, I can't accept these. They must be They're worth nothing sitting in my closet," he interrupted. "My hands can't manage the fine work anymore. These tools made thousands of perfect pastries at the Ritz. They deserve to keep working." Maggie ran her fingers over the tools, noting the quality and the care with which they'd been maintained. "Were these from your time at the Ritz-Carlton?" "Yes, my last position before retiring." "You never talk much about your career," Maggie observed. "The hospitality industry can be complicated, demanding, rewarding when you're valued, crushing when you're not. Weren't you valued with your talent?" "For most of my career, exceedingly so, until ownership changed. New management brought in their own people, relegated veterans like me to lesser roles. It's an old story in the industry." Something in his tone made Maggie suspect there was more to it, but she didn't press. Instead, she carefully closed the case of tools. "I'll treasure these and use them well. Thank you." Later that week, Maggie used Harold's tools for the first time, marveling at how they elevated her work. The precision knives made perfectly even cuts in dough. The specialty spatulas allowed for delicate transfers of pastry. With these professional implements, she could attempt more ambitious recipes. Working together one Saturday, Maggie, Iris, and Harold developed what would become their signature item, Iris's Sunshine Rolls. The creation combined Grandma Rosalie's cinnamon roll base with Harold's French lamination technique and Iris's creative twist, a sunflower seed and honey glaze that caramelized beautifully in the oven. The first test batch emerged golden and fragrant, the spiral pattern resembling sunflower centers. When they broke one open, the layers pulled apart in delicate sheets, revealing a perfect balance of cinnamon, butter, and sweet dough. "I think we've done it," Harold said. "This is distinctive, something people will remember and come back for." He was right. When they debuted Iris's Sunshine Rolls the following week, customers raved. Detective Sullivan ordered 3 dozen for the police station's monthly meeting. Word spread, and soon people were pre-ordering them days in advance. With their signature product established and a growing customer base, Rosalie's Rolling Bakery was evolving from survival mechanism to genuine business. Maggie opened a proper business checking account, obtained the necessary permits with Mrs. Chen's help, and even invested in simple branded packaging with Iris's sunflower logo. One morning, as Maggie was packaging orders, she came across a page in Rosalie's recipe book she hadn't noticed before. Between the recipes for honey cake and apple turnovers was a handwritten note. "Remember, Maggie, that baking is love made visible. When the world seems darkest, create something that nourishes others, and you will find your own spirit fed." The words brought tears to her eyes. Somehow, her grandmother had left exactly the message she needed to find at exactly the right moment. With renewed purpose, Maggie threw herself into expanding their offerings. Beyond breads and sweet rolls, she began creating seasonal specialties: apple hand pies in autumn, gingerbread in winter, lavender shortbread in spring. Each recipe started with a foundation from Rosalie's book, enhanced by Harold's techniques, and finished with a creative touch from Iris. The bus itself continued to evolve alongside their business. What began as a desperate housing solution had transformed into a recognizable brand. They painted the exterior a cheerful yellow with Iris's sunflowers decorating the sides. Inside, they optimized the space for both living and business with clever storage solutions and multi-purpose furniture. Their parking situation stabilized as well. Detective Sullivan arranged for them to use a corner of the police department's auxiliary lot, a gesture that provided security and legitimacy. In exchange, Maggie ensured the station's break room never lacked fresh pastries. As spring turned to summer, an unexpected pattern emerged in Rosalie's recipe book. Maggie noticed that certain recipes contained extra notes in the margins, not just baking tips, but life wisdom. These notes seemed to appear exactly when she needed guidance, when she worried about their financial future. Prosperity comes to those who create value for others. Focus on quality, and abundance will follow. When she felt overwhelmed by the workload, rest is part of the recipe. Without it, everything falls flat. When she doubted her abilities, the master baker was once a beginner who burned the bread. Persistence is the yeast that makes us rise. It's almost like she knew, Maggie told Harold one afternoon as they worked side by side, like she left these messages for me to find when I needed them most. Perhaps she did. The wisest among us plant seeds of wisdom for future harvests they'll never see. With the business growing steadily, Maggie began looking ahead. They were making enough now to cover their basic needs, maintain the bus, and even save a small amount each week. But the question of their long-term future remained. We can't live in the bus forever, she acknowledged to Harold one evening. Especially as Iris gets older. She needs stability, a permanent address for high school eventually, and a normal teenage life. What are you considering? I don't know. Maybe eventually saving enough for a small apartment, or finding a permanent location for the bakery with living space above it, like Mrs. Chen has. Both worthy goals, Harold nodded, though I must say there's nothing normal about your daughter. She's extraordinary, as is what you two have built together. It was true, despite their unconventional living situation, or perhaps because of it, Iris was thriving in ways Maggie hadn't anticipated. Her grades remained excellent. She developed confidence, creativity, and a work ethic remarkable for her age. The other children at school knew about the bus now, but instead of being a source of shame, it had become something of a status symbol. Iris was the girl whose mom owns the famous rolling bakery, yet challenges remained. Summer brought sweltering heat that made the bus uncomfortable despite their insulation efforts. Business permits and health regulations grew increasingly complex as their operation expanded, and always, there was the physical toll of pre-dawn baking, followed by long days of sales and deliveries. The most unexpected challenge came from Iris herself. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, she asked a question that caught Maggie off guard. "Mom, do you ever miss your old job?" Maggie paused. "Sometimes. Parts of it. Why do you ask?" Iris shrugged. "I was just thinking. You went to college and had this big career, and now you're baking all day. Is this really what you want to do forever?" "Honestly, I don't know if this is forever," she answered carefully. "But right now, it's exactly what I want to be doing. I've discovered something I love, something that connects me to Grandma Rosalie, and something I can share with you. That makes it more meaningful than any corporate job I ever had." "Good, because I was thinking we should expand." "Expand?" "Yeah. We're turning away orders because we can't make enough in time, and people keep asking if we have a website or if we ship. I think we're ready to grow." Maggie stared at her daughter. This child who spoke of business expansion as casually as most kids discussed video games. "Have you been talking to Harold about this?" "A little," Iris admitted. "He says every successful business reaches decision points where they choose to stay small or scale up." Maggie made a mental note to discuss with Harold the appropriateness of filling her 11-year-old's head with business strategy, yet she couldn't deny the swell of pride at Iris's engagement with their enterprise. "Growing means more investment, more risk," Maggie explained. "We'd need more equipment, possibly employees, definitely more space than Mrs. Chen's kitchen can provide." "I know," Iris said, "but I've been doing research at the library. There are small business loans and grants for women-owned businesses, and we already have loyal customers and a unique story. That's more than most startups have." "Startups? Have you been reading business magazines again?" "Maybe. But I'm right, aren't I?" "You're not wrong," Maggie conceded. That night, after Iris was asleep, Maggie sat in the driver's seat of the bus, her thinking spot, and considered their future. The business was successful by any measure, especially given its humble beginnings. They had regular customers, reliable income, and a product people genuinely loved. But Iris was right about the limitations. The commissary kitchen restricted their production capacity. The bus, while perfect as a mobile sales point, couldn't accommodate growth. And without a proper business address, they faced challenges with everything from mail delivery to school registration. Maybe it was time to consider the next step, not just for the business, but for their lives. The following day, Maggie visited a small business development center at the community college. The advisor she met seemed intrigued by their story and impressed by their growth thus far. "You've done remarkably well for someone with no formal business training," he told her. "Most food businesses fail within the first year. You've found a sustainable model and a loyal customer base." "But," Maggie prompted, "but you're at a crossroads. Your current setup has natural limitations. To grow beyond them, you'll need capital investment, proper facilities, and systems that don't rely solely on you doing everything." He outlined options: applying for a small business loan, seeking investors, or continuing as they were while saving for future expansion. Each path had pros and cons, risks and potential rewards. "Take some time to consider what you really want," he advised. "Not every business needs to scale up. Some are perfect, staying small and specialized." As Maggie left the office, her mind swirled with possibilities. The idea of taking on debt made her nervous after the financial devastation of her divorce. Yet the thought of having a proper bakery, a real home base for their business and potentially living space for her and Iris, was undeniably appealing. She was so absorbed in these thoughts that she didn't notice the woman with the camera until a flash startled her. "Excuse me?" Maggie said. The woman lowered her camera, revealing a stylish 30-something with a bright smile and a press badge that read, "Tilly Chen, Food, Lifestyle Blog." "Sorry for the surprise. You're the bus bakery lady, right? I've been hearing about you all over town." Yes, that's me," Maggie replied. "Rosalie's Rolling Bakery." Tilly extended her hand. "I'm Tastemaker Tilly. I run a regional food blog with about 50,000 followers. I'm doing a piece on unconventional food businesses and would love to feature yours." Maggie vaguely recognized the name. Several customers had mentioned finding them through that food blog. Still, she hesitated. Their business existed in a delicate balance, and publicity could disrupt it. "I appreciate the interest, but we're very small. Just me and my daughter, really." "That's exactly what makes your story compelling," Tilly insisted. "The single mom who started a bakery from a converted school bus? That's gold. Plus, I've tried your sunshine rolls, and they're legitimately amazing." Before Maggie could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Iris. "Detective Sullivan says the alternator in the bus is making weird noises. He's calling a mechanic friend." "I'm sorry, I have to go," Maggie told Tilly. "There's an issue with our bus." Tilly quickly handed her a business card. "Think about it. This could be a huge exposure for your business. Call me if you're interested." By the time Maggie reached the police department lot, a mechanic was already examining the bus's engine while Sullivan and Iris watched. "Alternator's shot," the mechanic confirmed. "Can replace it today, but parts and labor will run about $600. Maggie's heart sank. $600 was nearly all their emergency fund, money she'd been saving toward more permanent housing. "Do it," she said. Without the bus, they had no business and no home. That evening, with the bus repaired but their savings depleted, Maggie found herself at a low point. They'd come so far from those desperate days sleeping in their car, yet they remained one mechanical failure away from disaster. As she paged through Rosalie's recipe book, seeking comfort in her grandmother's handwriting, she found another note she hadn't noticed before. "When the path seems uncertain, remember that the most beautiful gardens grow not in straight rows but in winding paths where the light finds unexpected places to shine." Maggie traced the words with her fingertip, drawing strength from their wisdom. Perhaps their winding path was exactly as it should be. 3 days after the alternator repair, Maggie was setting up their mobile display at the farmer's market when a sleek white sports car screeched to a halt nearby. Tastemaker Tilly emerged, camera in hand, making a beeline for the bus. "You never called," she said, "so I decided to find you instead. The farmer's market organizer told me you're here every Wednesday." Maggie arranged a tray of scones. "I've been busy. Bus trouble. All the more reason to let me tell your story, Tilly persisted. A feature on my blog could help your business grow, maybe even attract investors. Iris, who had been organizing their cash box, perked up at this. Investors? Like on Shark Tank? Exactly like that. Your mom's created something special here, and people should know about it. Maggie hesitated. Expansion had been on her mind since her conversation with Iris and her visit to the Business Development Center. Perhaps this was an opportunity rather than an intrusion. What would this feature involve? She asked. Photos of your bus, your baking process, interviews with you and your daughter about how you started, and of course, lots of beautiful shots of your food, Tilly explained. I'd also do a taste test review. My readers trust my palate, and this would appear on your blog, website, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, Tilly confirmed. I have different audiences on each platform, but about 80,000 followers combined. The number startled Maggie. Their biggest day at the farmer's market might see 100 customers. The idea of 80,000 people learning about their bakery was both thrilling and terrifying. Can we have a minute to discuss it? Maggie asked. Tilly nodded. Of course. I'll browse the market and come back in 15. Once she was out of earshot, Iris bounced on her toes. Mom, we have to do it. This could be huge. It could also be overwhelming, Maggie cautioned. If suddenly hundreds of people want our products, we can't meet that demand with our current setup. But that's a good problem to have, right? That's what Harold always says. Maggie smiled despite her concerns. Yes, that does sound like Harold. When Tilly returned, Maggie had made her decision. We'll do the feature, but I want to be clear about our capacity. We're still a very small operation. Understood, Tilly nodded. I'll include that in the article. Maybe suggest people pre-order or highlight specific days you're available. That way, expectations are managed. They arranged for Tilly to visit the commissary kitchen the following morning to photograph the baking process, then ride along in the bus for a day to capture the mobile bakery experience. What Maggie hadn't anticipated was Tilly's thoroughness. The food blogger arrived at 3 a.m., camera ready, determined to document every step from first mixing to final sale. She asked detailed questions about ingredients, techniques, and the stories behind specific recipes. This sourdough starter is 80 years old, Tilly exclaimed when Maggie explained Victory's origins. That's incredible. And these are your grandmother's original recipes? Most of them, Maggie confirmed. We've adapted some with Harold's help. He's a retired pastry chef who mentors us. And you live on the bus full-time, both of you? Yes, Iris chimed in. It's actually pretty cool. We've made it really nice inside. Wait. Your entire origin story is that you lost everything in a divorce and started over with just a bus and a recipe book? Put that way, it did sound rather dramatic. Maggie gave a brief version of their journey, focusing on the positive aspects of their reinvention rather than the painful details of the divorce. This is even better than I thought. You're not just selling pastries, you're selling resilience. A mother-daughter team who rebuilt from nothing. Throughout the day, Tilly captured hundreds of photos. Close-ups of Maggie's flour-dusted hands shaping dough, Iris carefully packaging sunshine rolls, the two of them serving customers from the bus window, Harold demonstrating a specialized technique. She sampled every item they offered, taking notes and occasionally closing her eyes to better focus on flavors. These are exceptional, she declared after trying Iris's sunshine roll. The lamination technique is perfect. You get these distinct layers that pull apart, but they're not dry like some commercial pastries. And that honey sunflower seed glaze is genius. It caramelizes beautifully, but doesn't become cloying. By the end of the day, Maggie was exhausted but cautiously optimistic about the feature. Tilly seemed genuinely impressed by their products and moved by their story. When will this be published? Maggie asked. I'll need a few days to edit photos and write it up, Tilly replied. Probably by this weekend. I'll send you a link when it's live. 3 days later, Maggie's phone began buzzing incessantly during their morning prep. Texts, emails, and social media notifications poured in faster than she could process them. Mom, Iris called, you need to see this. Tilly's blog post went live at 6 a.m. I found the best pastry in America. and "It's made in a school bus." The article featured stunning photos of their baking process, the colorful bus, Iris's artwork, and mouth-watering close-ups of their pastries. But it was the text that took Maggie's breath away. Some food experiences transcend taste. They tell a story, connect to our humanity, and remind us that extraordinary things can emerge from difficult circumstances. Rosalie's Rolling Bakery is such an experience. Housed in a converted school bus and operated by a mother-daughter team who lost everything in a divorce just months ago, this mobile bakery creates pastries that rival those I've tasted in Paris and Vienna. Their signature sunshine rolls, a laminated cinnamon roll with honey sunflower seed glaze, are simply transcendent. The perfect balance of buttery layers, warm spice, and caramelized sweetness makes them worth driving across state lines for. But what makes this bakery truly special is the palpable love that goes into every creation. Margaret Thornfield and her 11-year-old daughter Iris pour their resilience, creativity, and hope into each batch. Guided by recipes from Margaret's grandmother and mentored by a retired Ritz-Carlton pastry chef, they've created something magical from the ashes of personal tragedy. Currently, Rosalie's Rolling Bakery operates with limited capacity, following a weekly schedule of locations throughout the city. If you're lucky enough to find them, be prepared to wait in line, and trust me, every minute will be worth it. The article included their social media handles, weekly schedule, and a link to the simple website Iris had created at the library. "Mom, the website is crashing," Iris reported. "Too many people trying to access it at once." Maggie stared at her phone in disbelief. The post had been shared over 50 times in just 2 hours. Comments were pouring in from across the country, people tagging friends, planning visits, asking if they shipped nationwide. Maggie couldn't find the words. "Viral," Iris supplied. By the time they parked at their usual Wednesday farmers market spot, a line had already formed, stretching from their designated space all the way to the market entrance. People clutched phones displaying Tilly's article, some having driven from neighboring cities after seeing the post. "I came from Oak Ridge," one woman told them. "I had to see if these sunshine rolls were really worth the hype. They sold out within an hour, every roll, loaf, and cookie gone before most regular market vendors had finished setting up." Back at the commissary kitchen, Mrs. Chen greeted them with a knowing smile. "I see the internet has found you. My nephew showed me the article. Very good photos." "We're completely sold out," Maggie said, still dazed by the morning's events. "We need to make more for tomorrow's location, but I don't even know if we have enough ingredients." Mrs. Chen nodded. "I called my supplier. We get what you need. But my kitchen will be too small soon. You need your own place now." The pattern continued throughout the week. Wherever they parked the bus, customers were already waiting. Their social media accounts, previously followed by a handful of local supporters, gained thousands of followers daily. Local news stations picked up the story, then regional outlets, then national morning shows. The bus bakery, as people had begun calling them, became a feel-good human interest story that resonated with audiences. The attention was overwhelming. Their phone rang constantly with catering requests, shipping inquiries, and interview requests. Customers drove from 3 states away to try their pastries. "This is insane," Maggie told Harold one evening. "We can't keep up with demand. We're baking 20 hours a day and still turning people away." Harold nodded. "Success can be as challenging as failure, just in different ways. What you're experiencing is growing pains. It's more like growing agony," Maggie sighed. "We need more help, more space, more equipment. But I'm afraid to commit to expansion when this could all be temporary, just a viral moment that fades." "Is that what your instincts tell you?" Harold asked. "No," she admitted. "The response isn't just about novelty or a good story. People genuinely love what we're making. The quality is real." "Then perhaps it's time to consider those options the business advisor discussed: loans, investors, a permanent location." Before Maggie could respond, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it. Another media request, likely, but something made her answer. "Is this Margaret Thornfield of Rosalie's Rolling Bakery?" A polished male voice inquired. Yes, speaking. My name is Daniel Reynolds. I'm a producer with Food Network. We're interested in featuring your story in an upcoming special on unconventional food businesses. Would you be open to discussing this opportunity? Food Network? The television channel? The very same, Reynolds confirmed. Your story has caught fire, Ms. Thornfield. We'd like to be part of telling it. After scheduling a preliminary call with the producer, Maggie turned to Harold, stunned. Food Network wants to feature us. This is getting out of hand. Out of hand, perhaps. Or exactly as it should be. The following day brought another surprise. As Maggie and Iris were serving customers from the bus window, a sleek black car pulled up nearby. A sense of dread washed over Maggie as she recognized the vehicle, her former mother-in-law's Mercedes. Victoria Ashworth emerged, immaculately dressed as always, followed by Maggie's ex-husband Robert. They stood at a distance, observing the line of customers with expressions of disbelief. "Keep serving," Maggie told Iris quietly. She approached the Ashworths with her chin high, conscious of the flour on her apron and the wisps of hair escaping her bandana, a sharp contrast to Victoria's salon-perfect appearance. "This is unexpected," Victoria said by way of greeting. "What are you doing here, Victoria?" Maggie asked directly. "We saw the news coverage," Robert explained. "And people keep mentioning it at the club, that bakery woman. We realized they were talking about you. We came to congratulate you," Victoria added. "It seems you've landed on your feet quite creatively." Maggie allowed herself a moment to appreciate the irony. The last time she'd seen Victoria was in the Mercedes driving away from the courthouse, splashing dirty water on her as a final insult. Now her former mother-in-law stood before her, watching dozens of people eagerly waiting to purchase her baked goods. "Would you like to try something?" Maggie asked. "We're known for our sunshine rolls." Victoria hesitated. "I suppose I should see what all the fuss is about." Maggie returned to the bus, selecting a perfect specimen of Iris's sunshine roll and placing it on one of their branded plates, a recent upgrade from their initial paper napkins. Victoria accepted it with the reluctance of someone being handed a suspicious package. She broke off a small piece, raised it to her lips, and took a delicate bite. For a moment, she was silent, her expression unreadable. Then something shifted in her eyes, surprise, followed by what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "This is extraordinary," she admitted quietly. "My grandmother's recipe," Maggie explained, "with some refinements from a former Ritz-Carlton pastry chef who mentors us." "You have professional training now?" "Not formally, but I have good teachers and good instincts." Robert, who had been silently watching this exchange, finally spoke. "The restaurant has been struggling," he admitted. "Dad's health isn't good, and the new chef isn't working out. We've been losing customers to trendier places." Maggie understood then why they had really come. Not just curiosity or social pressure, but business interest. "We might be able to help each other," Victoria suggested. "You could supply our restaurant with these pastries, or perhaps even open a location inside it." The Ashworth name still carries weight in this town. The offer was stunning in its audacity. These people who had taken everything from her, who had dismissed her as worthless, now wanted to capitalize on her success. "I appreciate the offer," Maggie said carefully, "but we have other plans for expansion. Iris and I have built this independently, and we want to maintain control of our brand and our future." "I understand. Still, the offer stands if you reconsider. It would be mutually beneficial." As they turned to leave, Victoria paused. "You've created something impressive, Margaret. I wouldn't have thought you had it in you." The statement, while backhanded, was the closest thing to a compliment Victoria had ever given her. Maggie watched them drive away, feeling a complex mix of vindication and an unexpected weight lifting from her shoulders. The Ashworths' opinion of her no longer mattered. She had proven her worth not just to them, but to herself. That evening, as Maggie and Iris prepared for the next day's baking, another unexpected call came through. It was Daniel Reynolds from Food Network again. "Ms. Thornfield, I'm calling with an interesting development. During our filming preparations, we've had another party express interest in your business. James Harrington, the restaurateur from Brooklyn, saw our production schedule and asked about you specifically." James Harrington? Maggie repeated. He owns several successful establishments in New York, very well respected in the industry. He's interested in discussing a potential partnership, perhaps bringing Rosalie's Rolling Bakery to Brooklyn. Would you be open to meeting him when he visits for our filming next week? New York, Brooklyn. The words hung in the air like a fantasy, a world away from their converted school bus and small-town success. Yes, Maggie heard herself say. After ending the call, she sat in stunned silence. The bus that had once represented their lowest point might now be the vehicle that carried them to opportunities beyond imagination. What was that about? Iris asked. How would you feel about going to New York? Maggie asked. Iris's eyes widened. Like, to visit? Maybe more than that. Someone wants to talk about opening a Rosalie's bakery there. In New York City? Iris clarified. Brooklyn, specifically. Would we take the bus? I don't know. Maybe. We should. Iris decided. It's part of our story now, and we could paint it with a New York skyline along with the sunflowers. Maggie marveled at her daughter's resilience, how quickly she could adapt to new possibilities, how she embraced change as adventure rather than threat. Perhaps that was the greatest gift of their journey, teaching Iris that starting over wasn't something to fear but a chance to create something even more beautiful. As they prepared for bed that night, Maggie found herself turning once more to Rosalie's recipe book. The page fell open to a section she hadn't explored before, recipes for celebration cakes. In the margin, her grandmother had written, "Save these for the moments that matter, the victories, the milestones, the days when you need to mark that you've come through fire and emerged stronger. Every great journey deserves to be celebrated with something sweet." It felt like permission to dream bigger, to consider possibilities that had seemed impossible just months ago, to celebrate how far they'd come while looking forward to how much farther they might go. The day of the Food Network filming arrived with perfect cinematic timing, golden morning light streaming through scattered clouds, casting the yellow bus in a warm glow that made its peeling paint look intentionally rustic rather than worn. A production crew of 6 people descended upon Mrs. Chen's commissary kitchen at 5 a.m., setting up lights, microphones, and cameras to capture what the producer called the authentic Rosalie's experience. Maggie and Iris, having barely slept from excitement, arrived in matching aprons Iris had decorated with hand-painted sunflowers. "Just pretend we're not here," the director instructed. "Do what you normally do. We want to capture your real process." Trying to ignore the boom microphone hovering above her head, Maggie began her morning ritual, feeding Victory, the sourdough starter, measuring flour with practiced precision, checking the consistency of dough with fingers that had developed an instinctive understanding of when something was right. Iris, initially shy before the cameras, soon forgot their presence as she focused on her tasks, measuring ingredients, preparing filling for the sunshine rolls, arranging cooling racks in their specific order. "How long have you been baking?" the interviewer asked Maggie during a brief break. "Professionally, only about 6 months," Maggie admitted. "But these recipes have been in my family for generations. My grandmother Rosalie was the real baker. I'm just carrying on her tradition." "And living on the bus? Was that always the plan?" "No. The bus was a necessity that became an opportunity. When you lose everything, you find creative solutions. The bus saved us, and then it became our brand." The crew followed them from the kitchen to their mobile setup, filming the now familiar line of customers waiting for their daily offerings. Among them stood a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, casually but expensively dressed in a way that subtly announced success without needing to declare it. "That's James Harrington," the producer whispered to Maggie. "The New York restaurateur I mentioned. He'd like to speak with you after we finish the main filming." Maggie nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her flour-dusted apron and the wisps of hair escaping from beneath her bandana. This man represented a potential future so different from their present reality that it was hard to imagine. The filming continued through their morning service, capturing the joyful interactions with customers, Iris's natural charm as she handed over carefully packaged pastries, and the organized chaos of their mobile operation. By noon, when they typically sold out, the director called, "That's a wrap," and the crew began packing up their equipment. James Harrington approached, extending his hand. "Ms. Thornfield?" "James Harrington. I've been watching you work all morning, and I'm impressed. More importantly, I've tasted your creations, and I'm beyond impressed." "Thank you," Maggie replied. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Is there somewhere we could talk? I have a proposition that might interest you." They settled in a quiet corner of a nearby cafe, Maggie, Iris, and Harrington at one table, while Harold, who had come to witness the filming, sat at a respectful distance. "I'll be direct," Harrington began. "I own several food establishments in New York, each with a specific focus and identity. I've been looking to add an artisanal bakery to my portfolio, but I wanted something special, not just another pretentious pastry shop selling 9 croissants. He sipped his coffee before continuing. "What you've created has a soul. It has a genuine story and exceptional quality. I'd like to bring Rosali's to Brooklyn, a proper brick-and-mortar location, with living space above it for you and Iris. I'd provide the startup capital and location in exchange for partnership." Maggie's heart raced. "Partnership, meaning? I provide the space, renovation costs, equipment, and my business infrastructure. You provide the recipes, techniques, and brand identity. We split profits 60-40, 60 to you as the creative force, 40 to me as the investor. You maintain complete creative control of the menu and operations." It sounded too good to be true. "Why us? There must be hundreds of bakeries looking for investment." Harrington smiled. "Thousands, actually, but none with your particular magic. The combination of traditional recipes and modern presentation, the mother-daughter story, the authenticity of how you built this from nothing, it's compelling, and compelling stories sell pastries." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Plus, those sunshine rolls are legitimately the best pastry I've had in 5 years, and I eat at Michelin-starred restaurants weekly." Iris, who had been quietly listening, asked the question foremost in Maggie's mind. "Would we have to leave our bus behind?" "Not necessarily. The bus has become part of your brand identity. I imagine it could serve as a mobile unit for catering, special events, maybe weekend markets. But you'd have the stability of a permanent location as your primary operation." After promising to send a formal proposal for review, Harrington left them to discuss. Maggie immediately turned to Harold, who joined them at their table. "What do you think?" she asked. Harold stroked his chin. "His reputation is solid. I made some calls after I heard he was interested. Former colleagues who still work in New York hospitality speak highly of him. He's known for letting his partners maintain their unique vision rather than corporatizing everything." "But New York," Maggie said softly, "it's so far. We'd be leaving everything, our customers, our routine." She looked meaningfully at Harold. "Our friends." Harold reached across the table, patting her hand. "My dear, this business has outgrown this town. You've created something special that deserves a bigger stage." His eyes twinkled. "Besides, I've always wanted an excuse to visit New York again. My joints may protest, but I could manage a trip now and then to check on your lamination technique." The decision wasn't made lightly. Over the next few weeks, Maggie consulted with a small business attorney, scrutinized Harrington's proposal, and had long conversations with Iris about what such a move would mean for them. "You'd be changing schools, leaving your friends," Maggie reminded her. Iris considered this with the serious expression that made her seem older than her years. "But we're good at starting over now, aren't we? And I could FaceTime with my friends here. Plus, think about the art museums in New York. I could see the real Van Goghs and Monets." Ultimately, the decision felt right. The bus had given them shelter when they needed it most, had transformed into a business that sustained them, and now it would carry them to the next chapter of their story. The 3 months of preparation were a whirlwind. Harold helped them scale recipes for commercial production. They studied New York food service regulations, developed systems for increased volume, and planned how to maintain their artisan quality while expanding. Mrs. Chen hosted a goodbye dinner, presenting Maggie with a set of traditional Chinese kitchen deities to protect their new bakery. Detective Sullivan arranged a police escort for the first leg of their journey, a gesture that brought tears to Maggie's eyes. The most difficult farewell was with Harold. The night before their departure, he invited them to his apartment for one final lesson. "I want to show you something I've never shared before," he said, retrieving a worn leather portfolio from his bedroom. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, photographs, and menu cards from his long career. "This is from my time at Ashworth's," he said quietly, pointing to a faded photograph of a younger Harold in chef's whites, standing proudly beside an elaborate dessert display. "You worked at Ashworth's? My former in-law's restaurant? For 12 years. I was head pastry chef there before the Ritz. Victoria's father, the original owner, valued my work. But when he passed and Victoria's husband took over," he shrugged, "they wanted flashier desserts, less traditional technique. When I refused to compromise quality for trendiness, they pushed me out." "Why didn't you tell me?" Maggie asked. "At first, I wasn't sure if you were related to those Ashworths. Then, when I realized you were, it seemed like reopening old wounds would serve no purpose." He smiled wryly. The revelation gave new meaning to Harold's investment in their success. He hadn't just been a kind neighbor or a baking mentor. He'd seen in Maggie a chance to nurture talent that the Ashworths had failed to recognize. "I have something for you," he said, presenting her with a small wooden box. Inside lay a single perfect sunflower seed, nestled in velvet. "Plant this at your new bakery," he instructed. "Let it remind you of where you started and how far you've grown." The morning of their departure dawned clear and bright. The bus, freshly painted with their logo and Brooklyn Bound added beneath it, was loaded with their essential equipment: Harold's professional tools, Victory, the sourdough starter, and Grandma Rosalie's recipe book. A small crowd gathered to see them off. Mrs. Chen, Detective Sullivan, and several officers, regular customers, and Harold, standing slightly apart, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Ready for our biggest adventure yet?" Maggie asked Iris. Iris nodded. "Ready." The journey to New York became a pilgrimage of sorts. They took their time, stopping at landmarks along the way, with Iris documenting their trip through drawings and photos in a journal she titled The Sunflower's Journey East. They visited bakeries in each state they passed through, sampling local specialties and exchanging techniques with fellow bakers. Maggie was surprised by how many people recognized them from the viral blog post or the Food Network feature that had aired just before their fare. Departure. "You're the bus bakery people," became a common greeting at gas stations and rest stops. As they approached New York City, the reality of what they were doing began to sink in. The traffic grew denser, the buildings taller, the pace faster. Iris pressed her face to the window, marveling at the skyline appearing in the distance. "It's like in the movies," she whispered. Navigating the bus through Brooklyn streets proved challenging, but with GPS and the occasional help from amused locals, they finally reached their destination. The space was better than they had imagined from photos. A former laundromat with high ceilings, large windows facing the street, and ample room for both production and customer seating. The apartment above was small but well-designed, with 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and windows that caught the morning light, perfect for early-rising bakers. Renovations began immediately. Harrington had architects and contractors ready, but he insisted that Maggie and Iris have final say on all design decisions. They chose warm colors, natural wood, and a layout that allowed customers to watch the baking process through a large interior window. The bus found a permanent parking spot in a small courtyard behind the bakery, visible from the street, a colorful beacon that connected their past to their present. In a quiet moment during the construction chaos, Maggie planted Harold's sunflower seed in a pot placed near the front window, where it would receive morning light. "Do you think it will grow here?" Iris asked. "I do," Maggie replied. The grand opening of Rosalie's Rising was scheduled for a crisp October morning, 6 months after Tilly's blog post had changed their lives. They chose the name deliberately, a tribute to Grandma Rosalie, to the rising of bread dough, and to their own rise from adversity. The night before, Maggie couldn't sleep. She stood at the apartment window, looking down at their creation, the beautifully renovated bakery with its hand-painted sign. The bus parked proudly alongside the neighborhood they were just beginning to know. "Are we home now?" Iris asked. Appearing beside her in pajamas, Maggie put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. I think we are. Morning brought clear skies and a line of customers extending 6 blocks, a mix of locals, food enthusiasts who had followed their journey online, journalists, and supporters. Harold had flown in for the occasion, refusing to miss what he called the culmination of our little baking education. As they prepared for the doors to open, Maggie spotted a familiar figure near the end of the line, Victoria Ashworth, alone and attempting to look inconspicuous behind large sunglasses. I'll be right back, Maggie told Iris. Victoria straightened as Maggie approached, removing her sunglasses. Margaret, congratulations on your opening. Thank you for coming, Maggie said. I had business in the city, Victoria replied. Then, with visible effort, she added, but yes, I wanted to see this, to see what you've built. Would you like to come in early? She offered. Avoid the wait? Victoria blinked in surprise. That's very kind, but no, I'll wait my turn like everyone else. She hesitated, then said quietly, I was wrong about you, Margaret. I'm sorry. The apology, unexpected and clearly difficult for Victoria to offer, was a gift Maggie hadn't known she needed. It closed a chapter, allowing her to fully step into this new life without the shadow of old resentments. Thank you, she said simply. Back inside, Harrington was making a brief speech to the assembled staff, the 12 people they now employed, including a young assistant baker, 2 counter staff, and a delivery driver for their wholesale accounts. Today marks the beginning of something special, he concluded. Rosali's isn't just another bakery. It's a reminder that with skill, determination, and heart, it's possible to create beauty from whatever life gives you. I'll now turn things over to the true creative force behind everything you'll taste today, Maggie and Iris Thornfield. Maggie stepped forward, Iris beside her. She looked at the eager faces of their team, at Harold beaming proudly from the back, at the crowds visible through the windows. 3 months ago, my daughter and I were living in a school bus because we had nowhere else to go, she began. That bus became our home, then our business, and finally our ticket to this moment. We learned that starting over isn't the end, it's often the beginning of something more beautiful than you could have imagined. She glanced at Iris, who nodded encouragingly. Today, we invite you to taste what resilience feels like, what family recipes passed through generations taste like, what beginning again with hope and flour-covered hands can create. At precisely 7 a.m., they unlocked the doors. The first customers entered to the scent of fresh bread and Victory's sourdough, the sight of gleaming display cases filled with sunshine rolls and a dozen other specialties, and the warmth of a space created with love. By the end of opening day, they had served over 500 customers, received write-ups in local food blogs, and accumulated a waiting list for special orders. Victoria had indeed waited her turn, ordered quietly, tasted their signature items, and left with a box of pastries and a new respect in her eyes. That night, exhausted but exhilarated, Maggie and Iris sat on the floor of their new apartment, surrounded by congratulatory flowers and cards. "We did it, Mom," Iris said. "We really did it." "We did," Maggie agreed, "and this is just the beginning." In the months that followed, Rosali's Rising became everything they had hoped and more. Within weeks, they were featured in the New York Times food section. 2 months later, Bon Appetit included their sunshine rolls in a feature on the city's best pastries. By Christmas, they had a 3-week waiting list for custom orders. The bus operated at weekend farmers markets, maintaining their mobile routes while the brick-and-mortar location handled daily operations. They employed 15 people, creating a small community united by their love of quality and craftsmanship. Iris, now 12, had her own section in the bakery where she created art-inspired pastries for special occasions, edible interpretations of famous paintings that earned her a profile in a teen magazine. She thrived in her new school, made friends quickly, and talked about studying culinary arts and business when she grew up. Harold visited quarterly, staying in their guest room and providing what he called quality control inspections, but what was really an excuse to spend time with the family he'd adopted. Each visit, he brought a new addition to Maggie's professional tool collection, items from his own career that he insisted belonged in working hands. The sunflower seed he had given them sprouted, grew, and bloomed, an enormous golden flower that customers considered a good luck charm. When it finally dropped its seeds, Iris carefully collected them, planting some in window boxes and packaging others as gifts for special customers. 1 year after their arrival in Brooklyn, Maggie sat in their apartment above the bakery, writing in a journal while Iris slept nearby. She opened Grandma Rosalie's recipe book, now displayed under glass in the bakery during the day, but brought upstairs each night, too precious to leave behind. The inscription on the first page remained her touchstone. "To my Maggie, the secret ingredient is starting over. With love, Grandma Rosalie." Maggie traced the familiar words, reflecting on how literally they had proven true. Starting over had indeed been the secret ingredient in their journey, the catalyst that transformed loss into creation. Morning would come early, as it always did for bakers. She would rise before dawn, descend to the kitchen where victory waited to be fed, and begin another day of creating sustenance and beauty with her hands. Iris would join her after sunrise, adding her artistic touches and infectious enthusiasm. Below their apartment, the bakery stood ready. Outside, their painted bus remained a colorful beacon, no longer a symbol of homelessness but a testament to resilience. And somewhere, Maggie liked to think, Grandma Rosalie was smiling at what her recipes and wisdom had helped build.